My family cut me off for refusing their $25,000 demand, but the real nightmare started after Christmas night. I never thought a wedding invitation could feel like a ransom demand, but there I was, staring at my older cousin's email with the same sinking feeling you get when you realize you've been played before you even joined the game. In neat gold script, it announced the unforgettable union of Liam and Ava at some luxury resort in the Bahamas, followed by an itemized guest experience package that made my jaw drop. For the privilege of attending, each guest was to pay $87,000, not including airfare. They promised a 2-night stay in a private ocean villa, a champagne yacht cruise, a 12-course reception dinner prepared by a celebrity chef, and exclusive entertainment that will be talked about for years to come. Oh, and everyone had to sign a non-disclosure agreement. At first I thought it was satire, the kind of joke Liam might have tried years ago when we were both broke and pulling pranks on each other at Thanksgiving. But as I read it again, and once more just to be sure I wasn't hallucinating, I realized this wasn't a joke. Liam meant every word. He even wrote that, due to the intimate nature of the event, attendance is limited to those who truly value this once-in-a-lifetime experience. I called my younger sister Charlotte before I even processed my own outrage. She picked up on the first ring and didn't bother with hello. Please tell me you've seen this insanity. I didn't have to ask what she meant. $87,000, I said flatly. And our own flights on top of that. He's lost his mind. Charlotte laughed bitterly and said it was like he was auditioning for a reality TV show no one wanted to watch. When I asked if our parents were going, she told me Mom was trying to convince Dad it was worth it, while Dad muttered something about how he wouldn't pay that much to watch the sun rise on the moon, let alone for a wedding. That sounded exactly like him. He wasn't stingy, but he hated stupidity, and this was stupidity dressed up in designer clothes. Then Mom called me directly, her voice heavy with forced cheer. She said Liam really wanted me there, and that this was about family, not money. I told her it was exactly about money and asked what the NDA was for, but she only said it was to protect their privacy. Privacy from whom? I wanted to ask. The Dolphins? I didn't bother arguing. Instead, I promised to think about it, knowing full well I wouldn't. The next morning, the family group chat was already in flames. My cousin Henry declared the whole thing a scam. Aunt Diane said we should be grateful to be included. Uncle Tom called it a shakedown, and Grandma typed, "Why NDA? Is there nudity?" By lunchtime, guests were publicly bowing out. Uncle Tom said he wouldn't pay 87 grand to see Jesus rise from the grave, much less Liam getting married. Charlotte chimed in that we could all go on a 2-week European trip for less than this madness. Then Liam jumped into the chat, accusing everyone of not caring about him, saying it wasn't about the money but about being part of the most important day of his life. I told him I'd be there if it were a normal wedding, but 87 grand and a legal gag order made it impossible. His answer came instantly, that celebrities did it all the time, and if we didn't think his wedding was worth it, we shouldn't bother coming at all. The group went silent after that, but the tension didn't. Every hour, another relative announced they were out. Liam's responses grew more aggressive, accusing us of being cheap and jealous. Charlotte finally told him the fact he thought this price tag made him better than us was exactly why no one wanted to go. That's when he started calling people directly. Our parents, me, others, ranting about loyalty and sacrifice, as if our love for him could be measured in wire transfers. When I refused again, he laughed coldly and said I'd made my choice, that I was selfish, and then he hung up. I should have been angry, but mostly I felt exhausted. The absurdity had stopped being shocking and started becoming something else, a kind of theater you can't stop watching because you know the next act will be even messier. 2 weeks passed without a single word from Liam, which would have been a relief if it weren't for the fact that my phone kept buzzing with updates from other relatives who couldn't seem to stop relaying his latest comments. Apparently, he had decided to host a pre-wedding screening process for guests who still wanted to attend, which meant an in-person interview with him and Ava over video call, during which they would assess commitment to the event's vision. The phrase alone made my stomach turn. Charlotte texted me screenshots of the invitation, which included an actual dress code for the interview. Smart formal attire to reflect the wedding's aesthetic tone. I thought she was joking until she sent me the PDF. When our cousin Henry refused the interview on principle, Liam went on social media to post a cryptic message about snakes in the family. He followed it with a long rant about how some people only want to be around you when it's convenient for them and don't understand the value of legacy. It was obvious who he meant, and just subtle enough to keep outsiders guessing. By the end of January, another absurd twist dropped into my lap. Mom called again, her voice sharp but trying to sound reasonable. She told me Liam had decided to subsidize part of the wedding cost for select family members, and that I had been chosen for this generous offer. The catch? I would still have to pay $48,000 upfront, plus sign an exclusive photo rights waiver that meant I couldn't post a single picture without his team's approval. I laughed before I could stop myself, which set Mom off. She said she didn't understand why I was being so stubborn when Liam was clearly trying to meet me halfway. I asked her if she had $48,000 lying around for a party she didn't even want to go to. She hung up without answering. Charlotte and I agreed we were done talking about it, but Liam wasn't done with us. A week later, I came home from work to find a courier envelope on my doorstep. Inside was a formal-looking letter with embossed gold lettering at the top. It was an attendance contract that outlined my obligations as a guest. Aside from payment terms, it demanded that I submit a list of any plus-ones for background checks, refrain from speaking to the press, and participate in a surprise entertainment segment during the reception. The last clause was the most disturbing. It stated that any guest found disrupting the harmonious atmosphere would be escorted out by private security and forfeit all associated costs. I called Charlotte immediately, my voice shaking with a mix of disbelief and anger. She'd received the same letter. Even worse, she'd heard from Henry that Liam had quietly told people he was prepared to take legal action against any family member who disparaged the wedding publicly. I thought it was laughable until Charlotte sent me a screenshot from his fiancée's Instagram story that read, "You can't defame what's perfect, but you can still get sued trying." By mid-February, tensions had split the family clean down the middle. On one side, a handful of relatives who still planned to attend, either out of loyalty, fear of being cut off, or sheer fascination with the drama. On the other, the rest of us, who were now not just declining but actively avoiding Liam's calls. It was in the middle of this mess that I got the most unnerving message yet. An anonymous email from a burner account warning me that turning down the invitation will have long-term consequences for your family standing. It read like something out of a mob movie, except it was about overpriced hors d'oeuvres and curated photo ops. One evening, Charlotte called to say she'd heard Liam was planning to publicly announce a family betrayal at the wedding reception. Apparently, he'd hinted that certain people had undermined him and Ava, and that the announcement would set the record straight. I couldn't tell if this was a bluff to pressure us into coming, or if he was really prepared to drag the rest of us in front of whatever rich strangers he was inviting. Charlotte was convinced he would do it. I wasn't so sure, but the fact we were even having the conversation said enough about how far things had gone. Then came the most surreal moment yet. I was in line at the grocery store when a woman behind me tapped my shoulder and asked if I was the cousin who wasn't coming to Liam's wedding. She said her friend was Ava's personal stylist and that everyone on the team had been told I was jealous and trying to sabotage the event. I didn't know whether to laugh or to ask for the stylist's number so I could tell her the truth. Instead, I told the woman she must have me confused with someone else and left without my receipt. By March, I had stopped checking the family group chat altogether because every time I did, it was like wading into a swamp of passive-aggressive comments and thinly veiled jabs. But the silence didn't last long. Liam showed up in my inbox again, this time with a single line, "Last chance to prove you care." Attached was a new invoice, now reduced to $42,000, with a payment deadline in bold red letters. No explanation, no apology, just the implication that if I didn't pay, I was officially done in his eyes. I closed the email without replying, but I knew this wasn't the end. By April, Liam had dropped every remaining mask that had hidden his true intentions. The polite invitations, the fake charm, and the claims of family unity were gone. In their place stood a relentless need to control every detail of how this story unfolded. It began quietly, with mutual friends pulling away, liking fewer of my posts, replying to my messages with vague excuses. Then Charlotte sent me screenshots from a private Facebook group where Ava's bridesmaids mocked a jealous relative trying to ruin their day. They didn't mention my name, but everyone who mattered could easily fill in the blank. Within a week, the attacks had moved from whispers to direct interference in my life. A coworker at the clinic took me aside after lunch, her voice low but urgent. She explained that someone had called pretending to be from a professional verification agency and had asked about my employment history, my personal finances, and whether I had ever been involved in suspicious activities. She refused to answer any questions, but she could tell the caller was fishing for something damaging. I couldn't prove Liam was behind it, but the timing lined up too perfectly to dismiss as coincidence. The following Friday night, while I was home with a glass of wine, my phone exploded with notifications. Liam had tagged me in a carousel of photos, luxury cars, diamond jewelry, tropical resorts, each captioned with remarks like, "Some claim they can't afford to support family, yet find money for themselves." Several images were mine from years ago, mixed with stock pictures I'd never seen. The goal was clear: humiliate me publicly and paint me as a selfish fraud. Charlotte called the next morning, furious. She had been tagged too, though her captions were slightly different, accusations that she followed poor influences and was too afraid to take a stand alone. It wasn't random pettiness anymore. This was targeted humiliation designed to fracture our relationships and isolate us completely. Days later, another hit landed. My landlord's office emailed to say they had received an anonymous report accusing me of operating an unlicensed business from my apartment. It was absurd, and I could disprove it in minutes, yet it was still infuriating. The stress of defending myself against deliberate lies drained every bit of energy I had left. I could practically hear Liam telling himself that I was finally feeling pressure. Around that time, I began noticing a silver SUV parked across the street from my building far too often to be random. The drivers changed, sometimes a man wearing sunglasses, sometimes a woman pretending to scroll her phone, but the car itself appeared again and again. It might have been paranoia, yet after the calls, the social media posts, and the false complaint, it felt deliberate. Charlotte told me to go to the police, but I didn't know how to explain it without sounding unhinged. My cousin wants me to pay $42,000 for his wedding, and now I think he's watching me wasn't exactly the kind of statement that inspired quick action from law enforcement. The breaking point came in a plain, unmarked envelope shoved into my mailbox on a Tuesday evening. Inside was a printed photograph of me leaving the clinic, my body circled in thick red ink, with the words, "You still have time to do the right thing," typed underneath in a sterile font. No return address, no handwriting, nothing to connect it directly to Liam, but I knew. I called Charlotte instantly, and her reaction confirmed my worst suspicion. She had received the same thing, except her picture was of her car parked in front of her house. That was the moment I stopped hoping this would fade on its own. I began documenting everything: screenshots of posts, copies of letters, notes of every unusual vehicle sighting, timestamps of strange calls, even short descriptions of how each incident unfolded. The fear I'd been carrying shifted into a sharper, more determined focus. Every attempt to intimidate me became another entry in a growing file that I planned to keep until the day it was needed. Still, the toll was impossible to hide. Friends asked if I was sleeping properly. My boss commented that I seemed distracted during patient consultations. Every unexpected knock on my office door made my chest tighten. It wasn't Liam's physical presence that worried me. It was the fact he could escalate endlessly without ever leaving his fingerprints on anything. By early May, I no longer saw this as a feud over an overpriced wedding. The ceremony was just the battlefield he'd chosen for his latest power play. Somewhere deep inside, I understood the most unsettling truth of all. The Bahamas wedding might not even be his ultimate goal. It was simply the backdrop for whatever finale he was building toward, and he was determined to force me into my role, whether I wanted it or not. That night, lying in bed and staring at the ceiling, I realized that waiting for him to make the next move was giving him exactly what he wanted. He wanted me cornered, reactive, unsure of what was coming next. I made myself a promise that if he crossed one more line, any line, no matter how small, I would respond in a way that could not be undone. It wouldn't be polite, it wouldn't be quiet, and it would make sure he understood, once and for all, that I wasn't just refusing his invitation. I was refusing to be part of his game entirely. 2 weeks after the envelope appeared in my mailbox, I realized Liam was far from finished. One evening, As I left the clinic, I noticed a man standing across the street, leaning casually against a brick wall with a coffee cup in hand. His gaze never shifted, not when I glanced at him, not when I reached my car keys. He didn't speak, didn't follow, but there was intent in the way he watched me. It wasn't casual curiosity. It was the kind of attention that feels like it's mapping every step you take. By the time I pulled out of the parking lot, he had vanished. The next morning, Charlotte called to tell me she had found a single white rose taped to her front door, its stem neatly wrapped in twine, petals glistening with dew. No card, no explanation, just a quiet sign that someone had been close enough to her home to leave it there. She didn't need to ask my opinion. We both understood the message. It wasn't romantic or kind. It was a statement, a reminder of how easily someone could reach into your life and leave a mark without your consent. I told her to get cameras. She told me they were already on their way. 3 days later, my work email was hacked. Patients began calling the clinic, alarmed by messages that appeared to be from me, asking them to confirm payment details for upcoming appointments. The messages were professional enough to pass a quick glance, but wrong enough to damage trust. Hours were wasted with the clinic's IT consultant as we locked down passwords, restored settings, and sent apology emails to every single recipient. Each hour stolen from me felt deliberate, calculated, and personal. Whoever was behind this was not just trying to scare me. They wanted to chip away at my credibility, piece by piece. It became obvious that I needed help outside my family. I called Ethan, an old college friend who now worked as a private investigator. I laid it all out for him. The SUV, the strange man, the fake accusations, and the flower on Charlotte's door. He didn't laugh or dismiss me. Instead, he said harassment like this usually escalated before it ended. Within 24 hours, he installed a discreet camera above my apartment door, slipped a GPS tracker into my car, and told me to keep a log of everything, even if it seemed insignificant. 1 week later, Ethan sent me a still from my building's camera. It showed a man in a baseball cap slipping an envelope into my mailbox at exactly 11:43 p.m. The shadows obscured most of his face, but the profile was clear enough. It wasn't Liam. It was Tyler, one of Liam's old college friends. I hadn't seen him in years, but I remembered the night he bragged about how Liam always got what he wanted because he knew how to make people regret saying no. Suddenly, the puzzle pieces began to fit together in a way I didn't like. Charlotte confirmed that Tyler had been at the last family barbecue, boasting about his new security consulting business. That could explain the SUV, the flower, and the man outside the clinic. But it didn't explain why they were so bold. The harassment didn't stop. One Friday evening, I received a video call from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered, only to see a live feed of my own apartment door. Someone was there, standing motionless. Before I could speak, the call cut off. Ethan later said they had been there for less than 30 seconds. I was done playing defense. I contacted a cousin on my father's side, someone Liam hadn't spoken to in years after a failed investment scheme. Within a day, he sent me a screenshot of a text Liam had mistakenly sent to the wrong group chat. She's too stubborn to break, but we'll make her wish she'd just paid. It wasn't enough for the police, but it was enough to confirm what I had suspected all along. Charlotte suggested confronting him at the upcoming family dinner, which our parents insisted I attend to clear the air. I didn't like the idea, but Ethan thought it might be useful. I arrived with my phone loaded, the image of Tyler at my mailbox, the text from Liam, and my detailed incident log. Liam smirked when I walked in, clearly expecting me to falter. I waited for the table to fall silent, then slid my phone across to him. His smirk broke for half a second before returning. "You have no idea what you're talking about," he said, leaning back. I didn't respond. I didn't need him to admit anything. Not here, not now. But I wanted him to understand that I wasn't scared anymore, and that I had the patience to wait him out. As the conversation shifted, I caught him watching me with calculation rather than amusement. For the first time, I wondered if he was beginning to think he might have underestimated me. That night, I left the dinner early. Outside, the cold air cut sharply against my cheeks, and the street lamps hummed faintly overhead. As I approached my car, I spotted a folded piece of paper under the windshield wiper. My pulse didn't spike as I opened it. In thick black marker, it read, "Last chance to make this easy." I slid the note into my bag, started the engine, and pulled away from the curb. If this was his last chance for easy, I was prepared to show him exactly how complicated things could become. The week after that note, the city felt smaller, like every corner had eyes and every shadow carried my name inside it. And I moved through those days pretending normalcy, while keeping my keys between my fingers and my phone on record whenever footsteps trailed a little too close behind mine, because I knew Liam wouldn't accept silence as an answer, and Tyler wouldn't miss the chance to turn silence into compliance. And I refused to be the quiet thing they could move across a board they thought they owned. Ethan kept telling me we should force the issue with a formal complaint and a press packet so nothing could be buried. But I also knew how easily charm could varnish a lie, especially when the liar wore expensive shoes and a clean smile. So I gathered proof like kindling, patient, stubborn, and colder than I'd ever been before. Charlotte called each night with the same brittle calm, asking whether I'd eaten, whether I had checked my door camera, whether the unknown number called again around 9, and every time I told her yes, and every time the call ended with breath and silence. The exact same rhythm like a metronome beating out my boundary. And maybe that repetition was a lullaby for them, because it almost lulled me into believing this would stay ritual instead of turning brutal. It changed on a Tuesday when I found my front door locked but unlatched, a detail easy to miss. And inside there was nothing moved except a single half-inch of the living room rug, pushed forward like someone had tried to put it back and left a fingerprint made of dust. And I stood there listening to a house that felt like a throat swallowing, then backed out and went to Ethan's office without even locking behind me. He swept the place with a rented scanner and a patience he probably only used around bomb techs and frightened friends, and he found nothing, which meant the point hadn't been planting, it had been proving, a little theater to say, we can be here whenever we like, and I believed them because the couch still smelled faintly of cologne I didn't buy. That night, I traced the harassment map on paper and realized how neatly it bowed around Liam's calendar, never touching his travel days, always spiking after he posted photos with Tyler or the old fraternity crew, and the pattern made something new inside me. Not panic and not revenge, but the quick, ugly clarity you get when you finally stop arguing with the truth. I drove to his place under a sky that looked rubbed out by erasers, the kind of sky that eats sound, and I parked 2 blocks away because I didn't want his cameras to study the plate Ethan told me to keep, then walked the back route along a fence that needed paint and a hedge that had swallowed a rusted tricycle, and I thought about childhood summers when we believed hedges were castles and brothers were forever. And I almost laughed because the only castle here was the glass office I saw, glowing behind his kitchen, where his silhouette leaned forward with a phone raised like a mirror. He saw my reflection before he saw me, turned, and smiled the way you smile when a dog returns without being called, which told me he had been waiting for a cornered thing. I told him I brought the log, the images, the text he sent to the wrong thread, the audio of footsteps and the timestamp that matched Tyler's car rental. And I laid my phone against the window so the light caught the screen and forced his eyes to accept the math. And for a breath the smile cracked like ice under a skater's blade. But then he shrugged the way men shrug when they have a second plan. I didn't hear the back door until it breathed cold air across my neck, and Tyler's shadow fell over my shoulder like a verdict, and the hit landed clean just above my ear. Not rage, not chaos, just professional force designed to fold me without noise. I woke with tape biting my wrists and a taste like coins in my mouth, the car bouncing over rutted gravel and pine needles, the dome light off, the dashboard a low red pulse. And I listened to Liam humming tunelessly, a sound people make when they're pretending to be fine, while Tyler scrolled his phone, the glow turning his face into a mask that had already forgotten mine. We stopped where the road gave up, the forest stepping closer and the night stepping in, and they walked me between trees that reached down like careful hands. And I thought about how many times Charlotte had said my name soft so I wouldn't forget it belonged to me, and how many mornings I'd watched strangers open their mouths while I repaired damage, and how it always felt like making bargains with pain. And I wondered who would make a bargain for me now. Liam said almost nothing as we reached the clearing, just breathed hard like he hated sweating. And when he finally spoke, his voice had that threat of disgust he reserved for people who refused his shortcuts. And he told me I should have taken the easy way because now there were too many costs to carry back. And I told him he had no idea what I could survive, which was true until the ground disappeared. The shove wasn't violent. It was tidy, a gesture meant to erase. And the drop wasn't long, but it was enough. because the slope hid rock beneath leaves, and the rock found the soft part of my side, and then the hard part of my skull, and the night narrowed to a point that pulsed with each heartbeat, and I felt warmth sliding along my hairline like a secret trying to leave. Above, the trees blurred into a ceiling with moths winging along it, and somewhere far away a branch snapped, and the crunch of retreating steps counted out a certainty I couldn't bargain with. And I thought about Ethan texting and getting no answer, about Charlotte calling the police and slicing through indifference with the steadiness she saved for broken systems. And I hoped they would both forgive the day I left them with silence. Time loosened its fingers and I slipped between them, but flashes still reached me, and I saw a pair of headlights turn wrong and hesitate, and I heard a woman's voice say hello like it was a rope she could throw down, and I tried to call back, but breath had become something I owed and couldn't afford, so I moved my fingers instead, tapping slowly against the leaves the way Charlotte and I used to tap messages through apartment walls when we were too sad to speak, and I imagined she would feel this rhythm anyway, because love travels stranger paths than cars or roads or fists. The woman scrambled down with the panic of someone who doesn't yet know what blood means, pressed her scarf against my temple the way you press wishes into fountains, and told me to stay with her. And I wanted to say I had never left, not really, that I had been holding that stubborn center even while fear built houses on it. But the edges were going, and her face blurred into the shape of every friend who ever chose me without price. Sirens came like a promise that arrived 2 scenes too late, and the night bent around their red language, and voices layered over voices. Ethan stronger than the rest, because he always spoke like he had maps no one else could read, and I felt hands lift me, and weight shift, and cold air bite new skin, and for a heartbeat I believed I might be smuggled back into my life as though this were only a rehearsal. The ambulance smelled like plastic and lemon, the ceiling lights cutting the dark into squares, and a medic whispered numbers to another medic while Ethan kept saying my name as if repetition could braid me to the stretcher. And I focused on the numbers the way I used to focus on measurements and margins when precision could fix things. And the numbers slipped, but I chased them anyway, because chasing was the last thing that was still mine. Somewhere the driver shouted for clearance, and the siren climbed and swore. And I thought about the ocean I promised myself I'd see in spring, about the long blue distance and the glittering edges where waves learn to fall and rise again. And the thought made a small warmth inside the cold, which felt like proof that beauty is stubborn, and I held that as the pain unstitched itself into light. I don't know where endings go when they finish, whether they sink or rise or scatter like birds when the gate swings open, but I know what I want carried forward, and it is simple even while it is fierce. Tell Charlotte I kept the rhythm. Tell Ethan he was right about the map and wrong about the ending. Tell anyone who meets a smile that shines too clean to touch it like a blade instead of a blessing. And if someone ever stands outside your door with a flower taped there like a threat, please remember my voice exactly as it sounds right now and bolt the lock and call for help and choose the kind of stubborn that keeps you breathing. The lights above me slowed and widened like eyes deciding to close, and the medic told Ethan to move back. And Charlotte's ringtone split the air inside the van and kept ringing even when Ethan couldn't spare a hand to answer. And the ring folded into the siren, and the siren folded into a hush that belonged to neither of us. And in that hush, I thought about the first time I cleaned my own apartment after stopping the monthly payments and how the floor gleamed like a new road. And I smiled because it meant I had already stepped onto it. The hush turned into a hallway with doors that opened on places I had loved. The clinic at morning with coffee steam lifting like prayers. The park where Charlotte and I counted dogs to calm ourselves. The porch light at our parents' house that once felt like safety and later like theater. And I walked past each door without stopping because love doesn't stay in rooms. It follows you out. And I needed it outside. The hallway shortened and widened at the same time. A trick I would have admired if I weren't so tired. And at the end there was only sky. The kind you can fall into without landing. The kind that doesn't demand, and for once I was allowed to move without being followed, without being priced, without being measured, and I went as far as I could take myself, and then a little farther, carrying the stubborn center that still belonged to me, and I set it down gently where it could learn to rise.